In the grimy, rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn, 1919, a young man, barely 20, stood at the precipice of a life that would echo through the annals of American crime history. His name was Alphonse Gabriel Capone, but the world would come to know him as Old Scarface Capone. The city around him was a symphony of despair, a cacophony of clanging trolleys, honking Model Ts, and the ceaseless chatter of a million souls crammed into concrete canyons. The air hung heavy with the stench of horse dung, sweat, and the faint, ever-present tang of the nearby docks. Al Capone was not a product of the city's elite, nor was he a shining beacon of its immigrant promise. He was a child of the slums, born to poor Italian immigrants in the grimy tenements of Navy Street. His father, Gabriel, was a barber who struggled to make ends meet, his mother, Teresa, a devout Catholic who doted on her son. Al was the fourth of 9 children, a fact that would shape his life in ways he could never have imagined. The city was a harsh mistress, and Al learned its lessons early. He was a scrapper, a brawler, a kid with a chip on his shoulder and a switchblade in his pocket. He dropped out of school at the age of 14, much to his mother's dismay, and took up with a gang of street toughs known as the 40 Thieves. They were a motley crew, a mix of Irish, Italian, and Jewish kids, bound together by poverty, desperation, and a shared disdain for authority. Al's first brush with the law came at the age of 16, a petty theft that landed him in the reformatory at the Watertown Farm in upstate New York. It was a brutal place, a school of hard knocks where the lessons were harsh and the teachers were cruel. But Al was a quick learner, and he returned to Brooklyn a changed man. He was tougher, harder, and more determined than ever to make a name for himself. He found work as a bouncer at a dance hall in Coney Island, a place called the Harvard Inn. It was a rough-and-tumble joint, a place where the city's underbelly came to drink, fight, and forget. Al was in his element, a natural at keeping the peace, or rather, at making sure it was kept on his terms. He was big for his age, a towering figure with a face that was already marked by the scars of his violent past. His eyes were cold, calculating, and they missed nothing. It was at the Harvard Inn that Al caught the eye of Johnny Torrio, a man who would change the course of his life forever. Torrio was a made man, a member of the 5 Points Gang, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the city. He saw something in Al, a spark, a hunger, a willingness to do whatever it took to get ahead. He took Al under his wing, taught him the ropes, showed him the way the world really worked. Under Torrio's tutelage, Al rose through the ranks of the underworld, his reputation growing with each passing day. He was a natural leader, a charismatic figure who inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. He was ruthless, cunning, and utterly without mercy. He was, in every sense of the word, a gangster. But as Al Capone's star rose, so too did the shadows that would eventually consume him. He was a man on a collision course with destiny, a destiny that would see him rise to become the most powerful and feared criminal in America. But that was still to come. For now, he was just a young man, standing on the edge of greatness, ready to take his place in the annals of history. As the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn shimmered in the dim light of a gas lamp, Al Capone took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward into the darkness. The city was his oyster, and he was ready to crack it wide open. Little did he know, the world was about to change, and he would be the one to change it. But that, dear listener, is a story for another time. For now, let us leave Al Capone on the cusp of greatness, ready to take his place in the pantheon of American crime. The stage is set, the players are in place, and the curtain is about to rise on a tale of power, violence, and the American dream gone wrong. The year was 1919, and the city of New York was a powder keg ready to explode. Prohibition was on the horizon, and the air was thick with tension. Al Capone, now a formidable figure in the underworld, was at the epicenter of it all. He had risen through the ranks of the 5 Points Gang, his reputation preceding him like a dark storm cloud. He was known as Scarface, a moniker earned not just from the jagged line that sliced across his cheek, but also from the brutal efficiency with which he conducted his business. Al's rise to power had not gone unnoticed by the other players in the city's criminal underworld. There were those who saw him as a threat, a young upstart who was muscling in on their territory. Chief among them was Frankie Yale, a powerful figure in the Brooklyn mob. Yale was a formidable opponent, a man with a network of contacts that stretched from the docks to the police precincts. He was not about to let some kid from Brooklyn take a bite out of his apple. The first shots were fired in a seemingly innocuous incident at a speakeasy on Atlantic Avenue. Al was there, enjoying a drink with some of his boys, when Yale's men stormed in. They were looking for trouble, and they found it. Al, ever the peacemaker, tried to talk them down, but Yale's men were spoiling for a fight. A bottle was thrown, a punch was thrown back, and all hell broke loose. Al fought like a man possessed, his fists a blur of violence. He was a natural brawler, his years on the streets of Brooklyn having honed his skills to a fine edge. He took a beating, but he gave as good as he got. When the dust settled, Al was left standing, his shirt torn, his face blooded, but his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. He had sent a message, loud and clear. He was not a man to be trifled with. But Yale was not a man to be intimidated either. He retaliated, sending a crew of thugs to torch one of Al's bootlegging operations. The fire burned bright, a beacon of defiance in the night. Al watched it burn, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew he had to respond, had to show Yale that he would not back down. He called a meeting of his men, his voice a low growl as he laid out his plan. "We hit them where it hurts," he said, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "We take out their distribution network, cut off their supply. We show them that we won't back down, that we won't be bullied. We show them that we are the future, and they are the past." The war was on. Al and his men struck like a viper, their attacks swift and brutal. They hit Yale's operations hard, taking out his speakeasies, his gambling dens, his distribution networks. Yale fought back, but Al was always one step ahead. He had a natural instinct for strategy, a talent for reading the ebb and flow of the battle. He was a general, leading his men into war, and they followed him without question. But as the conflict escalated, so too did the body count. The streets of Brooklyn ran red with blood, and the city's underworld was in a state of chaos. The police were getting involved, the heat was turning up, and Al knew that he had to end this war before it consumed them all. He called for a meeting with Yale, a truce to discuss terms. They met in a neutral location, a dimly lit back room of a saloon on the outskirts of the city. Al sat across from Yale, his eyes hard, his jaw set. He laid out his terms, his voice steady, his hands calm. He offered Yale a piece of the pie, a chance to work together, to carve up the city between them. Yale listened, his face impassive, his eyes calculating. For a moment, Al thought he had him. Thought that he had finally found a way to end this bloody conflict. But then Yale smiled, a cold, humorless smile that sent a chill down Al's spine. "You're a dead man, Capone," he said, his voice a low growl. "You just don't know it yet." The meeting ended, and the war continued. Al knew that he had to end this, had to find a way to take out Yale once and for all. He began to plan, to strategize, to plot his enemy's downfall. He knew that this was a fight to the finish, a battle that would determine the fate of the city's underworld. And he was ready to do whatever it took to win. But as Al Capone stood on the precipice of victory, he did not know that the fates had other plans. That the path to power was a treacherous one, filled with pitfalls and perils that he could not foresee. That the city of New York was about to change, and that he would be the one to change it. But that, dear listener, is a story for another time. For now, let us leave Al Capone on the eve of battle, ready to do whatever it takes to secure his place in history. The stage is set, the players are in place, and the curtain is about to rise on the final act of this bloody drama. The city holds its breath, waiting for the storm to break, waiting for the battle to begin. And as the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn shimmer in the dim light of a gas lamp, Al Capone takes a deep breath, squares his shoulders, and steps forward into the darkness. The world is about to change, and he is the one who will change it. But first, he must survive the storm. The rain came down in sheets, pounding against the cobblestones, washing away the blood and the sins of the city. Al Capone stood in the doorway of the saloon, his coat collar turned up, his eyes scanning the street. He could feel it in his bones, the tension in the air, the electric charge that preceded the storm. Tonight was the night. Tonight, he would end this war once and for all. His men were gathered around him, their faces grim, their hands resting on the butts of their pistols. They were ready, eager even, to follow their leader into battle. Al looked at each of them, his gaze steady, his expression calm. He didn't need to say anything. They knew what was at stake, knew what they had to do. The saloon door creaked open, and a figure stepped out into the rain. It was Yale, his coat soaked, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He stopped a few feet from Al, his hands visible, his stance relaxed. But Al wasn't fooled. He could see the tension in Yale's shoulders, the way his eyes darted from side to side, always watching, always calculating. "You're a hard man to kill, Capone," Yale said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "And you're a hard man to catch," Al replied, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving Yale's face. Yale smiled, a cold, humorless smile that sent a chill down Al's spine. "You think you can take me down, Capone? You think you can end this war with a single bullet?" Al didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew that this was a fight to the finish, a battle that would determine the fate of the city's underworld. And he was ready to do whatever it took to win. The rain pounded down, the street empty save for the two men and their followers. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to break, waiting for the battle to begin. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rain stopped. The clouds parted, and the moon cast its silver light down onto the street. It was as if the world was saying, "Now." Al drew his pistol, the metal cold and slick in his hand. He leveled it at Yale, his finger steady on the trigger. Yale did the same, his eyes never leaving Al's face. The two men stood there, frozen in time, their hearts pounding, their breaths coming in short gasps. And then, in a blur of motion, they both fired. The sound of the gunshots echoed through the empty street, the reports deafening in the sudden silence. Al felt a searing pain in his side, but he didn't falter. He kept his eyes on Yale, kept his pistol steady. Yale stumbled back, a look of surprise on his face, a red stain spreading across his chest. He fell to the ground, his pistol slipping from his fingers, his eyes glazing over. Al stood there for a moment, his pistol still raised, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down at Yale, at the man who had once been his enemy, his rival, his equal. And now, he was nothing more than a body on the cold, wet street. Al felt a surge of triumph, a sense of victory that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had won. He had ended the war. But at what cost? His men gathered around him, their faces filled with relief, with pride, with awe. They had followed their leader into battle, and they had emerged victorious. Al looked at each of them, his expression calm, his eyes steady. He didn't need to say anything. They knew what they had accomplished, knew what they had fought for. But as Al turned to leave, he felt a sudden, sharp pain in his side. He looked down, saw the blood soaking through his shirt, saw the bullet hole just below his ribs. He staggered, his vision swimming, his legs suddenly weak. His men rushed to his side, their faces filled with concern, with fear. "It's just a scratch," Al said, his voice weak, his lips pale. But he knew it was more than that. He knew that he had taken a bullet meant for Yale, that he had traded his life for the city's underworld. He knew that he was dying. His men carried him back into the saloon, laid him down on a table, their hands shaking as they tried to staunch the flow of blood. Al looked up at them, his eyes filled with gratitude, with love. He had led them into battle, and they had followed him without question. He had asked for their loyalty, their courage, their strength. And they had given it to him, freely, willingly, without hesitation. As Al Capone lay there, his life ebbing away, he knew that he had won. He had ended the war, had secured his place in history. He had become the king of the city's underworld, the man who had changed the course of its history. But at what cost? He had traded his life for power, his soul for a crown. And as he closed his eyes, as the darkness claimed him, he couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. In the end, Al Capone was not just a gangster, not just a criminal. He was a symbol, a legend, a man who had risen from the streets of Brooklyn to become one of the most powerful and feared figures in American history. He had fought for power, for respect, for a place in the world. And in the end, he had gotten it. But at what cost? That, dear listener, is a question that will echo through the annals of history, a question that will haunt the streets of Brooklyn, a question that will forever be a part of the legend of Al Capone. The storm had broken, the battle had been won, but the question remained. Was it all worth it? Only time, and the fates, would tell.